Welcome to Compassionate Conversations, a podcast produced by the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI Racine County, discussing subjects related to mental health and mental illness. Welcome back, and thank you for listening to the third and final part of our conversation with Scott and Maria. We want to remind you that if you feel triggered during this conversation, please stop listening and come back when you feel ready.
So, Scott, when we were just talking a little bit about dual diagnosis and how difficult that can be for an adult if they're already coming in with something already, and that being very difficult then for them to have to unpack. But you and I had talked a little bit earlier about what was it for you that finally led you to say that, I really want to work on this. I want to be able to unpack this. I want to take a look at it instead of, it basically taking you over, right? Mm-hmm. So in this place of just relationship dynamics, right, and the blaming and the projecting of that hurt and pain, what brought you to the place of finally going, okay, I'm ready to look at this?
Ask the easy questions. I would say I noticed I began, even though my mother is the one who told me that, I had to forgive the injury, that was the crux in the beginning of, of the internalization and all that. I buried it, and like I said, it doesn't stay buried, but I lived with it for 35 years and didn't do anything with it. But somewhere around age 45, 46, 47, it began to manifest itself as anger. Mm-hmm. And it was anger towards my father. Mm-hmm. Because I ended up having to live with my mother because of their divorce. And she, as much as she did, she got custody of me from the courts. And at the time, that's, mother got custody. That was the courts at the time. So you can't go back and change that. But in my mind, the anger that started coming out was, this wouldn't have happened to me if my dad had just tried harder in the divorce. Mm. And I realized, no, my dad did everything he could. Now I see that. But at the time, that's how it was manifesting. And I pretty much eliminated my mother from my life. And I was ready to kick my father out as well over this. And I got lucky in that my boss introduced me to some personal development stuff and professional development stuff that she had gone through and introduced it as doing work. And I did their program. It was a 3-day weekend type, what do you want to call it? Personal, professional, high-level development type thing. The interesting part is I got more out of it from the personal side than I did the business side. And in doing everything that I learned and whatnot that weekend, I was staying in a hotel, and it was a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday morning I'm getting ready to come back home and hop on the train in Chicago to Milwaukee, shaving. And the thought occurred of, I realized it had been 35 years I carried this. And the realization of what a waste. I wasted 35 years of my life. Mm. For what? And I mentioned it before, but I am so glad I was in a hotel because they have these huge water heaters. And I literally sat on the floor in the shower for a half hour and wept. The most gut-wrenching weeping you could ever imagine. But it was the release, and that was the moment healing began.
That's a brave moment at that point, Scott. Mm-hmm. It really is, because what I failed to mention, which he just so eloquently put out there with his story, is resentment builds and builds and builds. And that's the stuffing. I don't want to feel that. I don't want to go there, but it's in there.
Right.
and it's so infectious, right? 35 years goes by, and you're at this place of just on your knees weeping, going, what? 35 years, what have I done, right? In our world, I think they would call that moment the moment of ripping the trauma membrane, right? That is where you no longer, I mean, you're not getting just these little pin poke holes anymore, right? Where you can hold that back. Okay, I don't know if anybody remembers the little Dutch boy. Yeah, it was kind of do this, right? You're going to try to hold it back. At this point, that's just like, right? And so I just wanted to say that is incredibly courageous, because at that point there is no holding back. I mean, it's very raw, and it's so there, and it's so mixed with so much resentment.
You're confronted by the reality of something that it's there, it has been there, but you might have not wanted to see it before. Now you're opening your eyes to it. I recognize it as part of something that happened, which lead us into, again, the healing process. So as of that moment, and as the development that you practice, what do you do? What steps do you take after opening yourself to this, to start the healing process and to do the work of healing?
I was fortunate, that my boss introduced me to this type of work, and it's actually practice. I really have to say it is practice. I can't stress enough, where if I'd just gone and done this weekend course and stopped, that I wouldn't be here today. All right. As far as having this discussion, you have to continue to do the work. The things, I mean, they call them distinctions. Each one is really just a life lesson that you can learn, and it's a technique that you can use to work through stress or recognize something, and how to, in a sense, I think one of the things I came away with in the long run is that, in a sense, so many of the things in my life that were triggers were really my frontal cortex reaching into my midbrain, fight flight, and the connection was there. So when I rethink about the event, guess what? That connection's there, and it's going to say, "Oh, you're going to panic again." And a lot of the techniques I did, they help. I learned to separate. In a sense, we call it from the what's so versus the story we give it, and it happens quickly. But it was a technique, and with time and practice, it was essentially I got a chance to reprogram these connections and reassign the memory to better emotions. And the ability to give, so instead of I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about the man, wanting me to touch him, no longer causes the panic and then the remembering of I was abandoned in this and everything. No, now it is just, okay, this is a guy who liked me to touch him. That's it. And the panic and the shame is gone, and that connection is broken.
Yeah, there's a new narrative now.
Well,
actually, there's a narrative. So when it gets stuck in the limbic brain, it's floating out there, kind of like a ship without a landing pad. It doesn't know where to go. So we get that fight, flight, freeze, fawn. We're in this place. It doesn't know what to do. With the work that Scott has been doing and had done at that point, is that he's making that new narrative, the new neural connection of, okay, I can remove the emotion here for a second. I can put this narrative. He's not letting the emotion hijack him. Now, I get what I said, that there's emotional regulation in your prefrontal cortex, but your limbic brain is where we process emotion. We feel that. So if you come into something with fear, you're going to feel that fear, and you're going to have a hard time putting logic and reason to it. He put logic and reason, and still had to feel that pain, but without getting so frightened that it would whip him back. Does that make sense?
Because now it makes sense.
Yes.
You have an explanation of something that that you had no power over, but now you can make sense out of it, and that helps you reconnect with or disconnect from the emotions that trigger, and reconnect to new emotions
that can be tolerated.
And it becomes a circumstance instead of the pain of everything that went with it. It is now just, okay, it happened.
It doesn't have the same power that it did on you because now it was something that just happened.
I created a saying for myself out of doing this work, because I call it, if you can give that which you can give voice to,
Right.
loses its power over you.
It does.
And that is because I could give it voice constantly. And repeating that's doing the work and
Right.
not knowing it, or continuing to do the work and continuing to repeat it. The power went away, and it was now a circumstance instead of an actual overwhelming event.
Mm.
Yeah.
Now that's important because you're talking about people who do the work and how that helps in your healing process. But some people don't do the work.
Yeah.
And what are the consequences of that? I mean, what does that become, or how does that control you, if it does, in the rest of your life, in your relationships, in your family ties, etc.?
Yeah, well, you're singing to the choir at this point. So, being a mental health therapist doesn't mean that I can wave a magic wand and I can fix
Right.
everything. But, the past partner in my life didn't do the work that he needed to do.
Right.
He did put it out there, and it was sat for 40 years before he had brought it forward, which was pretty significant, very much like Scott. However, it was incredibly disjointed. It was out there. The trauma membrane is ripped. Everyone is aware of it. It had caused ripples through the family and through the surrounding family.
Right.
A lot of shame. No one knew quite what to do with it. So nobody did anything with it.
Mm.
And so it sat. And then from my perspective, I'm doing all that I can to bring in the role of a support person, which lends itself to the point of that whole idea, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink.
Right.
It is not and was not my job with my partners to tell him, this is the route that you need to go. As you heard from Scott, it is such a deeply personal experience. And I tell my clients, when we do discover something, because sometimes they come into the office for something else,
Right.
and by way of getting to know or an intake, we uncover sexual abuse. And at that point, I'm like, it is not my job to re-traumatize you, because it's not. This is such a personal, formidable time for them to, when they're ready to step into it. And he wasn't. And those coping mechanisms continue to be one of minimizing, blaming, projecting, the chaos.
Right.
The chaos. And when you're trying to be a support person in all of that, it's incredibly maddening and very isolating. Right? Now, there's no blame being put here. I'm saying is that it takes the work. All I kept hearing Scott say at the end there was, I kept working, I kept working, I kept working.
And you keep working.
Yeah.
I mean,
can I share? There's you just reminded me of something rather recent. As part of my volunteer work and advocacy at BeLeaf, they have a 24-hour crisis line that you can call if you're having a problem. I've been doing this for 3 years, probably 75 shifts over those 3 years. And each one of those shifts is a 24-hour shift. You have a cell phone in your hand, and you're there. I've taken calls at 2 a.m. Because you do this. But I've done this long enough now that I've had an opportunity that there are some of the callers who I've worked with or talked to multiple times. But in the process of doing the work, I just want to, it does have, if you do the work, it can make a difference. I had one caller, the first time I talked to them, it was actually one of my first calls ever with them, had no coping skills, no strategies, just an absolute, everything was a disaster, and you could tell they were lost.
Right.
And I was on a shift a week ago, and I got a call from them. And I don't recognize the person I was talking to anymore. They have done, it is obvious they are doing the work, but this person now has coping skills, they have resilience, they have, and it's just, I mention it, the difference between doing the work, but I also mention it because you have to realize healing takes time.
Correct.
And I've had an opportunity to talk to this person several times, and I've witnessed the outcome of their healing. Right. And it is powerful to see. So, you have to do the work, but you have to understand it takes time. And that's what I wanted to speak to.
That's very important. So I think it's great that you have lived experience, so you can support others who are on the process of healing. But what happened to those who want to support or who need to support somebody, but do not have the experience? They don't. They obviously do not understand the experience the same way. What do we say to them, and how can we, or what tools can we provide for them to help others who have lived this experience?
Sure. It's really important. It's a very valid point because they're not going to be on their own. So if it's a spouse or if it's a child that this is being uncovered, and now you have a parent or a spouse that's walking into this with the unknown, it can be very overwhelming for them. I like to call them the ally, right? They're the
Mm.
allies in healing and all of this.
Mhm.
And I personally try to work with them and then the understanding that they too are going to be going through their own therapeutic journey on all of this,
Right.
because they're going to be taking on a role of their loved one who's gone through this. It can be incredibly difficult, but I have seen it be one of the most rewarding things for a support person to go through as they watch their loved one unpack all of what they've been through. So this journey is first and foremost is that they need to support themselves. They have to be
Right.
sure that they're taking care of themselves emotionally and physically. And they have those supports set up for themselves, that they're not putting themselves into a codependent role, which sometimes can happen. If the partners have been together for a long time, they may have established a more of a codependent role to go in and keep saving out of the dysfunctional behaviors that have been there with their partner. Now the partner's willing to walk into this and doesn't want to function that way anymore.
Right.
We have the ally who's got to go, well, I got to stop reacting that way.
Right.
So this is where that can be very difficult. For them to be very observant, make sure that they are doing self-care, like I said, but that commitment to be able to share. So I always ask them, like, are you both in this together? Can we get a verbal commitment, right? That you're
Right.
going to grow together through this. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be difficult at best. Plenty of questions. Like, ask a lot. There's plenty of great resources out there for the support person to be able to read, for them to be a part of. But recognize that this tends to be the biggest piece I see, is that as the survivor is healing, their healing process can often trigger quite a few things in the support person.
Right.
So a support person might walk in going, hey, I'm your cheerleader, I'm here. And all of a sudden they're going, whoa, I got stuff here that's deeper than just that. So it makes for a really, can be a stressful dynamic, but it can
Correct.
make for a really wonderful growth experience. I've seen it between couples, and what can come out on the end when they really hang in there with one another is just this place of transparency and honesty and healing, and trust with one another. Like, this person was there, right? And that's I'm talking one person, but when you have a family system, now you got to be working with everybody in the family.
Right. Well, because in a way, it's causing trauma to everybody. It's not just the person who lived the experience, but now you are living that person's experience in a way, and is
In some ways too.
100%.
And not probably I would feel it's a different dynamic if it's present in a child abuse situation versus, let's say, it's a husband wife or partners. Let's call that. I'm going to use that. Let's say partners, and one partner is assaulted. Well, in reality, the actions of one person just assaulted both, because you destroyed trust. You destroyed. You've destroyed the dynamic that existed between them, and it has to be rebuilt for both. And that is because, like, I'm so glad you touched on that, because in my thinking about what I wanted to say here and stuff, one of the things that came out of it for me was the realization that you need that commitment from the other person, and then the realizing they're going to change too through this. You have to reestablish trust between the two of them, because there may be an initial victim blaming that comes from an assault. Well, why'd you do this? And that's going to hurt trust, and it's going to hurt the process of trying to rebuild. So there's so many complex dynamics there.
Oh, it's throwing the pebble in the pond.
Yeah.
Right? And you're just getting this ripple effect.
Right.
Because if you are having, that support person come in and they're not the one that's done something, that's one scenario. It could be a scenario that they are the one that's done something. And so they, the survivor has to deal with that and then find additional supports to help them through that. If it's a child, that's different. We might have school involved and other, other additional individuals that are in this child's life. The family dynamic can just get really shattered by this.
Yes.
And it still comes down to working and sticking with that survivor, knowing that this is their narrative and they get to move through this empowerment and possibility of what's in their future on their terms.
Yeah.
Some people decide to talk to perpetrators, some don't. If that's the case, they want to make sure they have survivors around them.
Right.
This is where it can get really complex, but it can also be very debilitating if the survivor chooses not to have support, which makes it difficult.
Right. Like we were talking before, I mean, this is a common experience, and in the commonality of the experience is where we find the healing.
Yeah.
And again, I want to reiterate about this person who doesn't live the experience, but in a way gets traumatized by the other person's experience. Because I think that's something that you brought up that I believe is important. You could ask yourself, why do I want to be the support person? And sometimes you don't have an option. If it is to your partner, it is somebody in your family, you might not be able to say no to be the support person. And then you need to learn quickly what do you need to do to support that person. Some people just choose to be that support person. And so what is in there that you would say, well, this is why you want to be the support person? You were talking about the healing and the connection. So what are the benefits, you would say?
Well, okay, it can be a sneak attack though, because here's the thing, is that if somebody wants to be the support person, there can be a secondary gain there that might have to do with their own quote issue, right? So codependence can be there. There's no doubt, right? I mean, if the survivor is in a dysfunctional set of their own keeping away from emotional vulnerability, for instance, all right, they're kind of pushing away. You may have a support person that wants to be able to be validated if they can get the person to be emotionally connecting with them. Well, what's that all about? So you have one codependent person and you have another person that's emotionally unavailable. And that whole dynamic can get really crazy until, like I said, that survivor is like, hey, I'm ready to stand still. I'm not going to push away, but there's going to take time. So the benefit for that support person, I should let me back up. The support person needs to take a really good inventory of themselves and ask themselves, what's my purpose and intent here to want to support, right? Because if they're just stepping into this because they feel that that's going to heal them,
then
that
they
may not
become
be,
the center of the process.
they can't, or they can hinder the work of the survivor, and I like to always say, stay in your own lane. So you got to stay in your own lane and you got to do your work, right? Stay in your place and do your work, because there's just as much work for that support person in a much different way, different capacity, as there is for the survivor who's going, I'm going to start unpacking Pandora's box now.
Right.
Because they've been living in Pandora's box until this point. So
in the realm of today's video world, hi, I'm Pandora. Welcome to my unboxing.
No, they kind of unboxing you want to be saying on YouTube.
Maria, thank you so much for actually talking about the role of the support person and their need for healing, because that was kind of the incomplete for me as I was trying to do my thoughts.
Sure.
But I do have a few thoughts about what I would say to a support person, because it's gonna. I'll just go through them. If you are a person who is going to be supporting someone who's been through this, the first thing I would tell you is believe them. The statistics I read in the same website as the other stuff I found, false reporting, yes, does happen. There are people who do this to try and get out or escape consequences, but the incidence and the rate of false reporting is very low. If someone comes to you, a child or anyone else, and says, this is what happened to me, Let me reiterate this: believe them. Um, and then don't victim blame or shame them. I mean, if an assault occurred, or how many times have you heard the thing? Well, if it wouldn't happen if you hadn't gone out dressed like that.
Yeah.
Do not shame them for it. Do not victim blame them for it. They experience something very, very difficult to go through. And please do not should them. I think that's the worst word in any language is should. Like, well, it's been a year. You should be okay by now. Or things, should removes the power from the survivor and implies that the other person or the shouldder knows more than you do. And that just angers me, because healing has no time frame. Healing belongs to the survivor. And then there's something else this poor person needs to understand. The survivor did not choose this. All right? Someone else hurt your loved one. Someone else violated your loved one. Someone else destroyed a part of who your loved one was. And if the survivor wishes to be whole again, they are now forced to do this incredibly hard work of healing, and all because of someone else's actions. You need to understand that. And I think one of the other things is, don't wish for the old person to be there again. Don't say, I just want my wife back, or I want, along those lines. That person no longer exists. Hopefully if you do the work and you have support, a new and stronger person emerges.
Sure.
And that is what the work you were talking to, and what you can see the growth. So, and that is pretty much the thoughts I had. And then I was going to talk about how, it's important that the support person have their own journey, and you have touched on that. So thank you.
Well, yeah, and I appreciate you, bringing up the point of view from the survivor point, right? To talk about this, because support people can they can throw a veil over this very quickly, especially if they have any connection to me who have done maybe the abuse, right? And that can be incredibly inflicting for them. And to hear Scott say that it touches a lot on what I was thinking earlier, that if Scott's ready to do this, or any survivor is ready to do this, they're motivated. And and that's huge, because it could take a sweep of just a few words from you, who you might think be a supporter in your life, that would deflate that motivation so quickly, because that shame is still so raw, right? And then this whole idea of that I'm not there to re-traumatize them. So this idea that he knows, or any survivor knows, that it's the right thing to do, there's an intuitive to that. There's an intuitiveness. They're like, okay, intuitively, I know that there is something right I need to be doing, whether it's confronting family or confronting my perpetrator, whatever it might be. And again, you get the wrong support person, or they say something that could be demoralizing like that intuitiveness can be like, oh wait, maybe not. Maybe I shouldn't do this right now, right? And they can go back into that place of safety really, really quickly. But the thing is that what I do find is that trauma membrane tends to get ripped open when they are just so tired of living their life like that. They're just done. They recognize that it's not an authentic, they're not authentic in how they were created. This trauma has robbed them in some way.
It's a little bit like the aha moment that you were talking about, in the shower, 35 years. And
the membrane went, and at that point, I knew something. I couldn't go back, and that membrane could not grow back.
Yeah, you're not going to stitch that stuff up. You're not. On point of, a readiness for the survivor is, but also being mindful of the flip side. Scott was ready in really many ways. I'm not hearing that he was going through a divorce or trying to get out of a really bad relationship at the time. He wasn't dealing with any kind of addictions. Right. These are some of the things that we want to be very, very careful of, that as a therapist you find out, because there's where that dual diagnosis would come in. It's like, we're going to start opening up that Pandora's box right about now, when we have to be dealing with the potential addiction of alcohol or drugs that might be also layered on. You'd want to be very careful. You'd want to have a focus and a goal to make sure that would be managed and under control first.
That's important because you need to be. I mean, you. One thing is to realize that you need the healing, and something different is to know that you can heal. I mean, to take the steps and to be ready to take those steps is a whole different work, which requires energy, focus. A lot of willingness to be able to be there.
Yep, it's a good point because the leading a horse, so to speak. If you're not ready to heal or you haven't reached the point of I'm exhausted yet, it's not going to happen. I mean, one of the things that in the work that I did, I remember them talking about um, they, they had a thing, what's missing that the presence of will make a difference in your life. But the flip side was, if you're not ready to change, then I assert that you have the life you want.
Mm.
All right. It may not be great. It may not, it may suck in some ways, but you are okay with the way things are. And it doesn't make it right or wrong, just you are okay with because it's not forcing change. You don't have to get out of those ruts you talked about in the
Right.
field. You're okay with that. It's when, in other words, I assert that if you live the life you want, and if you're not ready to heal, you're not going to be taking the action to heal. And that is the moment when, like you said, you're tired, the membrane breaks, and it's time to do it.
Yeah.
And that's not everybody's there.
Yeah. There's so many different ways that point comes
Yes.
for my clients. It just is some walk in and they're like, kind of like Scott, you know what? I had this moment. I'm ready. I've had others come in and it's because of stress within the family system. Or it's something similar that might be going on within the system. Not so much, I'm saying, of sexual abuse by someone else, but a dynamic where somebody might be overpowering someone else. I've seen that one happen quite a bit. And then the person who's got the sexual trauma that's not healed yet, they start getting all sorts of triggers. And then they start meddling. And then they want to fix. Because if I can control that, I'll feel better. And it's back to, wait, we got to bring this back here, right? Self-esteem, self-worth, self-identity is so fractured, but they are seeing it out there. Well, if I can fix that.
My hope is if someone is listening to this right now, that is an indicator for them that they are approaching the point of being ready.
And this could be a step on that path.
This is why we called it breath of courage.
It's that you took that breath and you stepped into courage.
That's what you did. And that's what they all do. You can't force that. That's such a beautiful, independent place of your first step of empowerment is I'm here and I want to look at this.
Thank you both again for being part of this conversation and for providing your knowledge and insight. Is there anything else that you would like to share with our audience?
Yeah, as we're talking about healing and the readiness for it and supports, I think it just brings in that idea of the healing is a multifaceted approach. Okay, so we're talking about groups, we're talking about counseling, but there's also many other things that come into play here. It's about your physical health. It is about your mental health. It is about your job, your stress levels, right? Your ability to be able to start making changes in different areas. And I have found so many different things that people do, whether it's soothing themselves with listening to different music, whether they get involved in yoga, whether they're doing mindfulness training. Diet is going to be really very important for them. So there's a lot that can come at them, but to be compassionate, with those who you're working with that are walking into this ring. I mean, it's been a knockout for them, right? And at the same time, to be able to recognize the steps that they do take and move forward. It is too easy, and you had brought it up earlier, Carlos, that they can fall back. They can go back into those tracks really, really easily. And we call that learned helplessness, right? All of the defenses can go up. So as they move through this process, it's meeting them where they're at. And sometimes it's not always going to be about having to unpack the emotional pain. Sometimes it's about, hey, let's go do an art project together, right? Or hey, how about I teach you a couple grounding yoga moves that you can just get in touch with your body. You don't always have to be unpacking the hurt and pain. It's there and there's no hurry for it. So compassion and kindness, they're going to already have enough long suffering the way it is. They've already gotten to this point. So, coming alongside also takes an awareness and an orientation of the person and persons that are around them.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Maria. Scott?
Well, actually, to the listener, if you're here because this is something you've experienced and you're looking for, what do I do? I just want to say to you, I am so sorry for the work that you need to do to heal now because of someone else's actions. And I applaud you for taking the step to do this. But also, I thought I'd close with, I am a survivor. And in a sense, what was my journey? What did healing kind of look like for me? And I kind of look at it like a two-part analogy. And it's for me, healing was like trying to walk through one of those carnival mirror mazes that they have. And you think you see a way out, and so you start going that way, and then all of a sudden, boom, you hit that wall again. But you don't give up, and through trial and error and perseverance, you develop resilience. You can get through to the other side of the maze. And the second half of the analogy is that in the beginning, all those mirrors that you're looking at and walking through in the maze are those kinds of the ones that warp you in the image that you see back. And, everything's wrong and there's nothing that's right. But as you do the work of healing and you find your way through the maze, the mirrors become less and less distorting. And one day you discover that you are actually seeing yourself again. So I wish to close with hope. And if you're willing to do the work, it can get better. So thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Scott, for this insightful conversation. And thanks to our listeners in the hopes that those of you who are walking the path of healing find it and find the necessary help to get to a better place. This has been Carlos Freck with Scott Kinderman and Maria Bishop. Until our next compassionate conversation. Compassionate Conversations is brought to you in a partnership with United Way of Racine County. Thank you for your support. NAMI Racine County is a local affiliate of the National Alliance on Mental Illness. Our vision is to create a compassionate community where all people affected by mental illness live healthy, fulfilling lives. NAMI Racine County provides advocacy, education, support, and public awareness so that all individuals and families affected by mental illness can build better lives. Visit us at www.namiracinecounty.org for more information on mental health and related activities.